Is the Family Proclamation political? This is what I hear a lot, right? If you're bringing it up too much or if you're talking about it almost at all, you must be coming from a right-wing perspective. And this is a political agenda that you have, Greg, or anybody else, if you're bringing up the Family Proclamation. I want to go over that because we need to understand where this comes from, right? The proclamation on the family from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't come out of a vacuum, right? It was issued in a very specific cultural, political, and legal environment combined with prophetic insight. Now, this episode is brought to you by Wavemakers Podcaster Cruise. Would love to see you on this. We are sailing down the Mexican Baja with Jasmine Rapoli, David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks, Dave Butler of Plain and Precious Things. I can hardly wait to see his presentations. We've got the Paul brothers from the Stick of Joseph, Cardin Ellis from Ward Radio, and Jacob Hansen from Thoughtful Faith, and yours truly. Great presentations, meeting these people in person, bringing the online community to the ship where we can meet face to face. There's a lot of energy for this. We're very excited about it. It's November 15th through 22nd. You can find out more by going to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com. At the top, trips and events, and scroll down to Wave Makers. Would love to see you there. Here we go. All right, the Family Proclamation did not come out of a vacuum, right? And it is very political in one sense and not political all in another. But we've got to understand how the Family Proclamation came to be, number one. And number two, the fact that everything becomes politics, especially with identity, right? Gender, with marriage, with family as a whole, the relationship between parents and children. All of these things are becoming more and more and more political, and it's just going to get worse. So this idea of this is a political thing you're bringing up. You may not be coming from a political position. I don't think I am when I state this, but the politics are thrown onto the issues. The politics, let's look at specifically within the Family Proclamation. You have got marriage between a man and a woman, ordained by God, right? Between a man and a woman, huge political issue. You've got the relationship with kids and everything from adoption there to parents' rights at school. How about gender roles, which are outlined in the Family Proclamation? No, not at all political, right? The law of chastity, very political. These are all things that in our times have become more and more political. And in the 90s, when the Family Proclamation was issued in 1995 from President Hinckley at a Relief Society meeting, you had a very interesting political environment, right? In the early to mid 1990s, you had a time of increasing debate over family, gender roles, feminism, abortion, and same-sex relationships, or even same-sex marriage. For the church, these were not abstract debates. They were direct issues about the doctrine that the church supported, right? These touched doctrines of eternal family, marriage, covenants, the plan of salvation as a whole, exaltation. And so leaders saw a need to publicly articulate the belief of the church about divinely revealed truth with family and gender, our identity. And they went on, apart from just Gordon B. Hinckley announcing this in 1995, September of 1995. We're getting the 30th anniversary of this. I'll go over that in a minute. Leaders frequently were warning about the attacks on the family. We were getting hit from all sides. We still are. It's much, much worse than it was then. And this is in general conference that we were getting these warnings. In the early 1990s, 93 to be exact, Hawaii became the first U.S. state where same-sex marriage was seriously tested in the courts. The Hawaii Supreme Court ruled in Bear versus Lewin, denying marriage licenses to same-sex couples was a form of sex discrimination, they said, unless the state could prove a compelling reason otherwise. This became the big tremor in the U.S. with marriage. And not just to the church, but to almost all religious organizations in the United States. Because if Hawaii legalized gay marriage, then the other states would be forced to recognize those unions under the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution. So everybody would have to basically accept it. And a reminder, right, this is long before Obergefell. This is 20 years before Obergefell, plus. And so part of the thought process was the church was going to have to recognize same-sex marriage. And of course, the thought process, which still goes on today, what would this mean for a bishop who is conducting and presiding over a marriage ceremony? What does this mean about the temple? So after this ruling, the church became very active in Hawaii very active, right? Very activist in the sense that they were fighting against this legalization effort. The local leaders and members encouraged and joined coalitions defending traditional marriage. And of course, the church leaders identified that it was necessary to articulate a prophetic standard on the family. These were the events that are happening around them, what's going on in the U.S. They took that as an impetus. They took that and had an initiative to make sure they articulated the beliefs of the church and the doctrine of the church. It was necessary to do that. We're actually, I think, at a position today, 30 years later, where we looked at that proclamation on the family in 1995 and thought it was a nothing burger. It's like, whatever. I mean, yeah, we understand this little thing going on in the U.S., but all this other stuff here, or in Hawaii, but all of this is just kind of like, of course, everybody understands this. I think we're in a position today, and it's not even close, actually, where there is a much larger percentage of members of the church, especially younger members of the church, up, say, 18 to 30 and younger, and not just limited to them, that are confused about the position of the church on some of these things, in the sense that they hope for change. It's like, do we need to come out with another proclamation on the family, right? There was cultural confusion in the mid-90s. What do we have today within the church? So the church becomes directly involved with the legal and legislative battles in Hawaii. In 95 and 96, it coordinated with local coalitions to oppose the legalization of same-sex marriage. And church leaders wanted to be sure that the teachings of the church were widely understood by their own members and by the public. And so the response of all of this was the Family Proclamation. Now, of course, add in prophetic insight, understanding, number one, we're going to build this off of eternal doctrinal truths, and we can see what's coming. You see that tidal wave coming in. You're not going to put up barriers and think that you're going to stop this. It doesn't mean you don't try, but Babylon is going to be Babylon. So in this environment, right, this is where we get the response from the church with the Family Proclamation. So what is it responding to? It is responding to political movements to change the definition of marriage. That's number one. It's responding to feminism and the roles of gender in the home. It's responding to division between parental rights and state rights. It's responding to gender fluidity. These are all political movements. And the church actually got very political in their efforts to push back. And oftentimes the Family Proclamation was used as a tool to activate members for whatever the prop was in 2000, right? Prop 22 in California in 2000. And of course, later the big one, Prop 8 in 2008. Was that just a political agenda by the church? I want to compare that to what's happening today and what's the big hoopla over the story at Fair and the Q&A at Fair, and understanding why this discussion is happening, everything that is built up to that point. That event did not happen in a vacuum either. And the big response comes from a response to political movements against identity and gender, against marriage, against gender roles, and against the family, attacks on the family. Again, there is more confusion in the church today on these issues than there was in 1995, and it's not even close. So when people say, well, Greg, you're just being political about this, you've got an anti-woke agenda. This is what one person said. You've got an anti-woke agenda, which is more important to you than being a disciple of Christ. And of course, they bring up peacemaking. That does not compute to me at all. First of all, a disciple of Christ would support the Family Proclamation. As Julie Beck, the president of the Relief Society, once famously said, if something is anti-family, it is anti-Christ. The reason she can get away with saying that is, number one, it's true. And number two, the doctrine of the family and the order of the family, the traditional family, that means a mother and a father and their children. Not everything is perfect around that, but that's the ideal. And the doctrine of Christ are bound together completely because of exaltation, taking full advantage of the atonement of Jesus Christ. The doctrine of Christ is to allow you and your family, and those that choose through agency, but to allow the opportunity for you and your family to live forever as exalted beings. That is the point. That is the purpose of the church. The purpose of the church is not to help you get to the terrestrial kingdoms. The purpose of the church is to support you as an individual and your family to gain exaltation. So you cannot pull these two things apart. So when you stand up for the Family Proclamation, are you being political? The church was. It was defining its doctrine, and it was being political. Now, I'm not saying they want to be political outside of going directly towards certain issues on same-sex marriage, especially. Back in the 70s, it was the ERA that they were fighting, which was gender roles, and they're concerned with the turning things upside down. That didn't really matter. We didn't need the ERA to turn everything upside down in the family. So, when I talk about the Family Proclamation, when I brought everything up from FAIR on this, it was not from a political position, but there's no way to get away from the entire thing being political. But don't excuse it as a political agenda. That's what I have a really hard time listening to people do that are typically in agreement with me on the Family Proclamation. Maybe on all of it, maybe even on every point. But man, if you stick up for this thing, if you bring this up in some way, that must be more important to you than being a disciple of Christ. Was that more important to the church than being a disciple of Christ when they formed the Family Proclamation in that environment? What is it more important to the church to be political when they brought it up several times, all the time at General Conference, fighting against what was happening in the United States and Canada? Why would they do that, by the way? Why was that such a big issue? Why did they have members calling us, even in Arizona, calling people in California to talk about this on Prop 8? Look, that was a very difficult thing. There was some horrible consequences that came out of that. People I know. So why the sacrifice? Why the attempt? Why be political about it? It's because it goes to the very, very core of the doctrine of Christ and of the doctrine of the restored gospel. Now let's keep going past the Family Proclamation. 1996, you've got this domino effect, right? The U.S. itself, the U.S., not the church, the United States comes up with the Defense of Marriage Act, right? The DOMA, right? That was passed by Congress, defining marriage federally as between one man and one woman. So the church, right, alongside most all other religious organizations, supported the efforts of DOMA. And they used the proclamation as a doctrinal and moral foundation for their members and for outside organizations. And you go into the late 90s and into the 2000s, there is a growing use of the proclamation, right? The proclamation was cited repeatedly in legal briefs, public statements, and grassroots campaigns, just like in Prop 22 in 2000 in California and Prop 8 in California in 2008. Inside the church, it became a teaching standard quoted in lessons, seminary, missionary work, and family home evenings. Remember those? So I'll ask you again, when you stand up for the Family Proclamation, are you being political? I don't think there's any way around that you're actually being political because you're discussing hot political topics. The Family Proclamation, whether you like it or not, is a lightning rod because it goes against everywhere that Babylon has moved. It's saying no, 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 no to these changes in our culture. No to the destruction of the family. Now, I will say this. What I've discovered in this whole event is there is a dark corner, especially on X, of mostly anonymous accounts from men that want to turn all of these things into a witch hunt, like the fair Q&A into a witch hunt. That makes no sense. Look, I brought this whole thing up to begin with, but not as a witch hunt. I brought it up because people need to be aware of what is happening. And going after someone isn't going to change anything. It's just going to make you feel good that somehow you have a moral victory. And to those individuals, I wish you would stick to the principles. Stick to the principles. Stick to the Family Proclamation. Let the brethren do their job. You do your job as a citizen and as a member of the church. Now, a couple more points I want to talk about. This is all from discussions that have been on Facebook, X, comments in the videos that I did on this whole issue, and personal conversations I've had with friends and others. There's a discussion that comes up, and by the way, this is the thing that I am very happy about with all of this, is that there is a large discussion happening with this, a very broad discussion. We can't put our heads in the sand on all of these things. This is a much larger issue than many realize. It's already causing an immense amount of confusion for members of the church. One discussion that's coming up is, what about orthodoxy? How can you be so orthodox about things? I want to state something very clearly from my end. I understand maybe from X and other people that talk about this issue may feel very differently than I do. But there is no litmus test in the sense of the Family Proclamation for someone being a member of the church. Because a member of the church can choose that maybe they don't even want exaltation. Maybe they don't want to follow the word of wisdom, right? Maybe they don't want to follow the law of chastity. That's their option. That's their decision, their prerogative. But from my standpoint, I've never put a litmus test for someone being a member of the church on the Family Proclamation. Now, has the Family Proclamation been used as a litmus test? Yes. Anybody who is involved with BYU and CES knows that those policies have changed in the last couple of years. And there's more of a focus on those elements of the Family Proclamation in the hiring process and the interviewing process. And there should be, because the political environment around us, especially found within academia, has accepted these things, hook, line, and sinker. And they're not things that should be taught to students at BYU. Not advocated for, at least. And I'm sorry, if you don't agree with that, fine. But members of the church don't pay for their kids to go to BYU to be indoctrinated into a woke ideology, an identity ideology, into queer theory and gender studies. They can go to any university practically and get that in spoonfuls anywhere. I'm going to come back in a second on a couple of statements from the First Presidency on the Family Proclamation from the 30th anniversary, which is coming up here in September. But orthodoxy, look, you're not orthodox. Sorry, you're not orthodox if you don't follow the Family Proclamation or support it. That's okay, right? My orthodoxy doesn't need to be your orthodoxy. I don't care. I'm going to put my arm around you. I'm going to be your friend. You could even be someone who doesn't even believe in the church. I've got friends that don't believe in the church, that are still in the church. I'm your friend. I'm happy you're at church. I'm happy we can communicate. Right. I'm not putting a litmus test out there for members of the church. Now, for much of the Family Proclamation, some of those tenets are issues for a temple recommend already. So those, certainly the law of chastity. So there's a litmus test to be temple worthy to some degree. That's certainly not all of the Family Proclamation. And then there's another one that I've seen where it's like, we're people that are afraid that we're limiting down what is orthodox in the church to just what we believe about the family. No, there might be some people that do that, but that's not what the big hoopla is about. The issue is the amount that this has intruded, permeated our culture, the identity and family and gender issues into our culture, and into the church. That's the issue. Back in the 70s, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's wait till you're married. It's stay away from drugs. Those are the big things you're pushing on because those were the problems at the time. Were you just focused in on drugs and teaching kids about drugs and the law of chastity? And that's all you reduced the gospel to? These things are political because they are made political by the world. The church has responded to them both doctrinally and politically at times with the Family Proclamation. So whether you're coming at this from a political standpoint outside of the church, or you're coming to it understanding the depth of the doctrine that is the foundation for the Family Proclamation, it's going to be political whether you like it or not. Please, to you members that support the Family Proclamation, do not call people out for being political. It's just another way to silence people on the Family Proclamation. Now, I'm not saying about people that use the Family Proclamation all the time and they're trying to use it sometimes as a bully club. But be careful, because most people don't. Most people don't do that. And they can bring up the Family Proclamation simply because they love the beauty of the doctrine of the family. And they see that it is threatened in culture and in the church. Just want to bring up the Ensign coming up in September. They're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Family Proclamation, which I think is amazing, fabulous, incredible. By the way, under the comms department. This is done under the comms department. But here, you've got a few things that I think are really important for us to point out. For example, they have one article here in the Ensign, which is for our day, right? The Family Proclamation is for our day. It's not for the 90s. It's not for the 19th century. It's for our day, right? We need this as a guide for our day. It says 30 years after the proclamation on the family was introduced to the world, its divine principles are more prescient and valid than ever. Why? Because of the political environment that we live in and the attack on the traditional family. Secondly, they've got an article here called By Divine Design, Apostolic Teachings on the Family. I want to go over just a couple of these quotes that I think are fantastic, right? This is from President Nelson. This was back in 2007 as Elder Nelson. He says, I quote from Elder Nelson, pivotal to God's plan is the family. It's the plan of salvation for exaltation. In fact, a purpose of the plan is to exalt the family. The earth was created so that we as premortal spirit children of our Father in heaven could come to the earth and obtain physical bodies. We are here to be tried and tested. We are here to choose liberty and eternal life, or to choose captivity and death. And best of all, we are allowed to fall in love, to be married, and to invite children into our families. Secondly, from President Dallin H. Oaks, those who do not fully understand the Father's loving plan, right? This is the center of the plan, for his children may consider this Family Proclamation no more than a changeable statement of policy. In contrast, we affirm that the Family Proclamation, founded on irrevocable doctrine, defines the kind of family relationships where the most important part of our eternal development can occur. All right, so this is not changeable. These are not changeable doctrines, and this is an important thing to understand. And people that are even on the right with this, people that support the Family Proclamation, they don't like this either. There's some of them that are like, oh, well, everything's changeable. Remember the blacks and the priesthood, they changed that. Remember polygamy, they changed that. Those are not core doctrines. Those are policies and procedures that the church enacted for a time. Everybody knew that blacks were eventually going to receive the priesthood. The sealing, and I don't care what some people say, there's some scholars out there that try to say that the sealings are different. They changed in the 60s. And no, the practice of sealing a man and a woman together in a temple marriage has always been the same. And I have brought this up several times over the years because I knew this is going to be a very hot topic for same-sex marriage in the temple. When I was interviewing Michelle Stone about polygamy, I brought this up for this very reason. She wasn't happy with me. She thought I was trying to advocate for polygamy. But I explained to her, look, plural marriage is not the plurality of wives in a marriage with a man. Right? We have to get that out of our head. That is not the practice. That is not what was going on. You didn't have, 5 women around an altar with one man and have a marriage with all 5 women. That's not what plural marriage means. It should be called plural marriages, right? It's one man and one woman in a marriage, and then they have their kids. And if the man is practicing polygamy back then, he would have another marriage with another woman, and between one man and one woman, and they would have their kids, right? That's how it was practiced. That hasn't changed. It's a horrible argument to make on the polygamy thing. Not for the polygamy deniers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about marriage in the temple. And here's the problem with believing that it is changeable. Say you've got a young gay man who is trying to hold on with everything he can to the church. But he goes to an organization, and there are several of these today, that say, don't worry about it. You be your authentic self. Go be your authentic self, because as soon as these old white men die out in leadership, this is going to change. And temple marriage will be accepted in the church. Gay marriage as a whole and gay relationships will be accepted in the church. So you go on and live your gay lifestyle, and eventually the church will catch up to you. And I've spoken to several gay men that have same-sex attraction that are horrified at the support, that type of support, in the guise of love and compassion that people within the church are offering. This is so bad and gotten so bad that a professor has written an 82-page paper. I did an episode on this not too long ago about a shadow faith within the LDS church, within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's published in an academic journal. It's worse than you think it is. I don't want to be a doomsdayer here. I'm just telling you that the issue is not the Q&A at FAIR. It's not the comms director. It's not your job. It's not my job. The issue is much broader. It is confusing to people, which is why I love this 30th anniversary here of the Family Proclamation, where we can get these kind of support and push this out there. This will not change. One of the things they've done here for the Ensign articles is, one of the articles is just the Family Proclamation, which is great because, like the scriptures, we don't usually read it. We refer to it, we talk about it, we understand the order of the family, but not many people go back and read this, at least on any kind of a regular basis. It is amazing. I'm not going to go through all of that right now. I've done this in another interview with someone else that's coming up very shortly. Going over the order of the proclamation and of the family and what's in here. But I do want to just go over the last 2 paragraphs of the proclamation. And this is what people who either do not support the Family Proclamation and hope it will change, right? I call it a hope in change over a hope in Christ, because it's against the doctrine of Christ. But here's the last 2 paragraphs. We warn that individuals who violate covenants of chastity, who abuse spouse or offspring, or who fail to fulfill family responsibilities will one day stand accountable before God. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Oh, we hate judgment. Stop judgment, Greg. No, truth is 2 sides. I'm going to read it again. We warn that individuals who violate covenants of chastity, who abuse spouse or offspring, or who fail to fulfill family responsibilities will one day stand accountable before God. But, Greg, I need to be my authentic self. Look, I give grace, I give mercy to individuals that have issues with this, of both identity and lifestyle. Okay? But there is an ideal. There's an ideal that we can't let go of. I did not grow up with an ideal situation in family, right? My parents divorced when I was 6 years old. I didn't have a father in the home. He's an amazing father. He did everything he could. An amazing person. And probably the biggest hero in my life. But that doesn't mean that they taught something different, that they didn't still teach about the ideal, right? In my case, I've been very fortunate because I have an amazing wife. And we do have had a mother and a father in the home for our kids the entire time they were growing up and now. And I hope that we are an anchor to them still as they're adults. I'm not going to advocate for something different than the ideal. I'm going to love all that are in all situations, but I'm not going to let go of the ideal. It goes on. Further, we warn that the disintegration of the family, think about everything that attacks that traditional family: identity, marriage itself, fidelity, sexual relationship, the law of chastity, division between state and parent rights with children. Yes, gender roles, right? We warn that the disintegration of the family will bring upon individuals, communities, and nations the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets. But if you bring it up, Greg, it's just political. Last paragraph. We call upon responsible citizens and officers of government everywhere to promote those measures designed to maintain and strengthen the family as the fundamental unit of society. You can call that political or not. Why are they calling for that? Because it's what's going to destroy us. The disintegration of the family will destroy any civilization, not just ours. I'm glad this discussion is happening. It needs to happen. We can't put our heads in the sand on this. We need to understand what's going on out there. We need to protect our families. We need to protect our children while still loving others and sustaining and supporting the brethren. You get on X, it is absolute unbelievable, these anonymous accounts especially, and what they're saying. These are people that are either already enemies of the church, or they cannot parse out destroying the church and the heads of the church from an employee or from policies, and understand that if you cut the head off of the church, the whole thing falls. Maybe that's really what you want, because if you could be right, if you're right, well, that's all that matters. The church is the greatest organization on earth, and it's not even close. And that's whether you're a believer or not. I think that if you really looked inside of it, that you could find that. But one of its greatest strengths is the doctrines of restoration, of exaltation, of who we are, what our purpose is. And these are built around the doctrine and order of the family, pulling on the powers of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Don't try to separate those.